the Citizen Media Rendezvous, TEDx, and a traditional Mohawk powwow, coming up on CUTV News. Welcome to CUTV News. I'm Bemma. On this week's show, we go to a traditional Mohawk powwow. Some of that colorful footage will be coming up later on the show. But now, we go to the Citizen Media Rendezvous, something that I covered earlier this week. Let's check it out. The second annual Citizen Media Rendezvous took place here in Montreal at the Palais de Congrès. It brought together journalists and many people from different areas to talk about journalism and its effects on citizen media.
In its infancy offline, it started as a magazine that's still published by the media club called the Dominion.
Now, you were one of the panelists here at the Citizen Media Rendezvous. How important is having a conference and discussing citizen media in Montreal?
I think it's really important. I think having a chance to have us all together in one place, it lets us exchange a lot of ideas. Open media and accessible media and I guess citizen journalism is such a new concept. It's progressed so rapidly over the past years. On the panel before, somebody mentioned that YouTube started in 2005. It seems like it was ages ago, right? So things are progressing incredibly quickly as far as in terms of how people can participate online in some ways. But there's still so many issues that we need to be talking about and not kind of just get kind of bowled over by the larger progressions. And so I think it's really important that we're here today to talk about how we can work together, what the new developments are for smaller projects that aren't necessarily the mainstream media, and to kind of step back a little. I think what Norm Cohn was saying before, just the idea that we're talking about accessibility as far as how do we put things online, but we're not talking about necessarily accessibility of who even has access to internet right now. So I think it's a good way to sit down and talk. It's obviously a large room, so it's nice that there's also the networking this morning and other instances where we can talk more one-on-one. But I think bringing together people in one place can really help to just move, to step back and reflect. And from that kind of move forward with our projects.
Yeah, one mentioned, I forget her name, but that is kind of like preaching to the choir. Now, how do we get citizens, in the community more involved in citizen media? Maybe people that aren't journalists or aren't related to the journalism industry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it's a matter of making it relevant to them. I think it's really important, at least for us. The reason that it's a network of local media cooperatives is that people are interested in what's going on locally. Especially when it comes to news coverage, when it comes to producing media, people are interested in what's going on directly around them. People are also interested in international events and things like that, but I think the way to engage people, they're not necessarily here today, but I don't think every event needs to necessarily bring in everyone. I think it's important to have those venues where the people who are working on projects directly have a chance to step back and talk about it, but I think it's going out into communities, talking with people, not just staying online and doing, following up on meetings like this, or conferences like this, to talk about, well, what other communities are we working in, what other communities are we not working with, and how do we go out and talk to those people and see how we can also adapt to meet their interests. Because obviously if their interests were being reflected, they participate, so it's kind of have a back and forth with them.
Great, well thank you, Tim. A demonstration that took place on the streets of Montreal had many members of the community out in support of the Tamils that came to Canada. Clifton Nicholas has the story.
This is Clifton Nicholas for CUTV News. I'm outside of Complex Guy Favreau in Montreal, where there is a demonstration of supporters who are supporting the Tamil refugees who recently landed on the shores of Vancouver Island.
Refugees are not terrorists. Let them stay.
These refugees have been detained on the basis of they suspect that they can be terrorists. And then this is what we are here to tell the public and to tell the ministers who made the bad comments on these refugees that they are not terrorists, and these refugees should have a fair trial, and they should be treated as any other refugees who comes to Canada, and to have a fair trial for them. So they have already been passed the 7 days trial, and then they put them for the next 7 days for the identity purposes. So we want them to be released after these 7 days not to be held them any more than that.
Deportations, no borders, no nations.
What's most disturbing is the fact that the media and like both national and international media have kind of condemned the fact that the refugees even decided to make that trip to flee their country of origin to Canada, to come to Canada, and it's just kind of discouraging for others who try to flee and try to find protection under international laws, and to be treated this way it's such a shame in this day and age. It's such a shame.
I've heard different comments from both right-wing people and also from other people of South Asian origin that these people are queue jumping.
See, I think they don't know their facts properly. It's simple as that. There's no such thing as queue jumping. See, it's a first come first basis. Who you can, like as a refugee claimant, you can come by boat, by air, by car. However you get to the border, it doesn't matter. And as soon as you say, I need help, I need refugee status, or anything of that sort, the Border Patrol officer automatically takes them in and starts to bring in the process of the refugee process. So the fact that queue jumping, it's like, it makes it sound like there's like a bunch of refugees who are just waiting to come here, and it doesn't work that way. There's a distinct difference between immigrants and refugees. There's a distinct difference.
Let them stay.
Let's talk about with the end of the Civil War, with the defeat of the LTTE, the government has started a crackdown, and it's interesting to note that the amount of army personnel have actually increased since the end of the war, and this is because there's a paranoid state that's brewing in the state of Sri Lanka. The government is fearing any sort of dissident, and this doesn't just mean Tamils, this means Sinhalese and Muslims, and anyone that speaks up against the government in any sort of fashion, they are facing persecution. Sri Lanka has, I'm pretty sure, like it has one of the highest kidnapping rates in all of the globe. So there is like proper treatments. There are many Tamils are in internment camps in the north and the east that are being for their protection and to try to weed out the terrorists a year later. So there's a lot of different things happening in different parts of the country, and it's no surprise to me that people want to get out. Most of these refugees have fully integrated into the Canadian society. What I really want to emphasize, please educate yourself about the law, because a lot of these things like queue jumping and illegal migrants and all those terms that are being thrown out there, their definitions are not being clarified. And if we just look at our laws and see what's in place and what we are party to, we are signatories to the Refugee Convention of the UN. So these things we have to uphold. So all these things about overthrowing certain things, there's no way we can do that because there's a system already in place. So I think a lot of people are talking about these issues without really knowing the full context, and they just want to be bandwagon and just hate on the others. So I think it's really important to understand what the Canadian laws are and try to reform them if there needs to be reform in a peaceful, democratic manner.
We've been working with Sri Lankan Tamil refugees from Sri Lanka since 1983, and we know that this is a very genuine cause, and particularly in the last year, the Canadian government has been, in a way, by its silence, acquiescing and complicit in the further persecution of Tamils who are now in camps. And just 2 weeks ago we heard from somebody who was in one of these camps, a woman who was a victim of interrogation and rape, and so we know it's going on. So we feel it's time that they stop this, they let Tamil refugees come in, and then all the details more recently, children being separated from parents, is just unacceptable.
There's been accusations on the part of right-wing pundits as to the criminal backgrounds or even being terrorists on these boats. What is your opinion on that?
I think if anybody knows the situation in Sri Lanka, they would realize how incredibly dire the situation is there, and that first of all, I don't believe in differentiating between legitimate and illegitimate refugees, but if there was a scale, I would say that people fleeing from genocide or genocidal government policies should be welcome into this country. And this whole rhetoric of them being terrorists, I think it's completely and totally unfair, not based on any evidence that's been ever presented to anybody. By virtue of their ethnicity, they're being called terrorists, and I think that's completely and totally unacceptable.
I feel the same way as you, as far as they're being judged by the color of their skins, and I think I don't know if you would agree that given that they're of brown skinned, if they were white, do you think they'd be treated differently?
Well, definitely we in Canada we have a history of racist policies towards migrants. From the late 19th century, Chinese people who were coming to work, migrants who were coming from Punjab in India. So we've had this. We've had enough evidence during the war, internment of people. So it continues. But your earlier question about sort of classifying people as terrorism makes them sort of easy targets, and an ordinary person on the street, quite justifiably so, would say, well, I want to be, safe in my Canada, etc. And so it throws up sort of spurious and unfounded allegations. In fact, a boat that came last year, everybody was quote-unquote processed, and they've been allowed to stay. So, I mean, even last year we heard this. They're all men, they're all tigers, they're all terrorists. And again we see that this is just something that's thrown up there to sort of get public opinion opposed. The government can say, well, Canadians. And I was quite heartened, for example, to hear on the cross-country checkup on Sunday, repeatedly people calling in and for the most part saying, we should let them stay. My parents were migrants, my grandparents were migrants. If it wasn't for, Canada accepting them, they would have died in camps, etc. So the ordinary Canadian really wants them to stay, and it's just our government taking a very right-wing stand.
I saw this poster that said we all came on boats, except for the Indigenous people who are from this land. That is true. And, a bunch of colonizers are now deciding who is welcome and who isn't. And I think that's something that I want people to think about a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, I really agree with Imdu, because whenever people sort of bring up this, okay, now we have to shut the doors because our quality of life is going to change. My response is, well, nobody except the Indigenous people lived here, and they were very open. And look at what's happened to them. And now we turn around and say, well, no more. We're here, but we're going to shut the gates. And we have so much in Canada. And again, all the research shows that migrants and refugees work the hardest to contribute. They are not welfare bums, and all the usual garbage that's put out to sort of build a kind of negative public opinion is just trashed when you actually look at the evidence.
No one is illegal. No one is illegal. Personne n'est illégal.
Coming up after the break, coverage of the TEDx conference here in Montreal.